What's one confession you'd only make anonymously? Story 1. When I was 13, my buddy from church invited me to go bowling and eat pizza at a place called the Golden Spike Pizzeria. We got there and had amazing pizza, and when we were almost done bowling, I had to go to the bathroom. So I went and horrifically clogged the toilet, and I panicked, so I kept flushing and ended up breaking the flushing handle. I ran out of the bathroom and said that I didn't feel good and that we needed to leave right away. As we were walking out, we passed by the bathroom, and I could see a river of water and waste coming out from under the door toward the bowling lanes. Years later, I drove by, and not only had the Golden Spike closed down, but the building was demolished. Story 2. I live on the West Coast, but near the end of 1998, my family took a trip to Washington, D.C. We went on tours of all the big landmarks, the White House, the Library of Congress, the Lincoln Memorial, etc. While touring the Capitol building, I think I was young and don't remember exactly where this was, our tour guide got really excited because we had a rare opportunity to see the office of the Speaker of the House, who at the time was Newt Gingrich. Apparently, this didn't happen often, and we were given very strict rules about what we could and couldn't do while we were in there, because it was actually Newt Gingrich's office, and he would be returning later that day. Everyone was well behaved and excited, and the tour guide started giving us this really impassioned speech about the history of the office and its significance. Then there was a smell, slow building at first, but it got worse and worse by the second. I mean, it smelled like someone had been consuming rotting skunk carcasses, and it had given them explosive digestive issues. It was eye-watering and, dare I say, somehow spicy at the same time. Our tour guide actually stopped mid-sentence and cut her speech short so we could all leave. Everyone, who had only moments ago been so excited to get into the room, was now basically clamoring to get out. I knew the source of this smell very well. My little brother, for whatever reason, had gone through a phase where, for like 2 years straight, he would just release the nastiest gas. We actually took him to the doctor on a couple of occasions because we were convinced there was something medically wrong with him, but this particular one took the cake. To this day, it was the worst smell I've ever experienced. The kicker to all of this was that almost exactly 2 weeks later, to the day, Newt Gingrich unexpectedly resigned as Speaker of the House. My family always jokes that it was a direct result of that nasty incident. Story 3. I'm adopted. My biological mom was a teenager, 15 or 14, when she had me, and she is the oldest. Her parents made her put me up for adoption and keep it a secret. It was a closed adoption, so there was no chance of finding out who she or her family was. Well, 20 years later, I met this girl. We hit it off, ended up hooking up, and whoops, condom broke, baby won. Okay, cool, no problem. The baby's mom and I stayed exclusive, but didn't get married, then came baby 2. We finally decided to get married and submitted for a family test, and bam. I had been having babies with my aunt. Story 4. I was on a plane once and had terrible gas. Like bubble gut, peel the paint off the wall kind of gas. I got up to use the lavatory, and a small test release confirmed that a crop dust would put me and everyone around me in need of oxygen masks. When I got there, it was occupied. I couldn't hold the pressure anymore, so I just let it go. Fortunately, it was silent. It was as terrible as I thought it would be, but the flight attendant assumed it was coming from the lavatory. She started spraying disinfectant at the lavatory door, assuming that was the source of the horrible smell. As soon as she started spraying, the lady exited the lavatory and walked into the spray. She also saw the woman in the seat next to the lavatory furiously fanning the air. They all thought the woman in the lavatory was the cause. I let her take the fall. Story 5. I used to work in an online chat room, and it was basically a huge scam where men thought they'd been chatting with the same woman for sometimes years, paying around £1 per message, when it was actually just random girls. We'd get only a few seconds to quickly read the previous message thread and reply. A lot of men were just there for adult talk, but many were genuinely desperate to meet the person they thought they had fallen for over the internet. It was obviously never going to happen. I quit when an older guy, I think maybe in his 70s, said he had spent almost all of his savings talking to this person and had started to realize he would never meet her. It broke my heart. Story 6. I'm 46 million. For a variety of reasons, I was already starting to think this way, but I had an irrational confirmation in 2009. I was driving alone in my dad's BMW 318, not the safest car according to crash tests, on the highway. The right lane was closed for road work, so I was going about 60 miles per hour in the left lane with no one in front of me. On the opposite side of the road, a car cut in front of an 18-wheeler. The driver swerved to avoid it, hit the median, and flew into my lane. I barely had time to hit the brakes before impact. I still remember the crash clearly, just like a movie, every single detail. I also remember my last thought before impact, a quiet, clear sentence. Okay, I'm going to survive this. Then I went from about 40 miles per hour to -40 in a millisecond. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, I was in absolute shock, or something like that. Just as we stopped, another car going much faster in my lane left a 60-foot skid mark before rear-ending me at around 50 miles per hour. When everything got quiet, I felt no pain at all, but I wasn't sure whether I was uninjured or completely paralyzed. My car's cockpit had just enough room to hold my body. I was lying on the passenger seat face down, with my chest pressed hard against the interior. I could barely breathe. Both my hands and legs were locked in place among the wreckage. The right door's anti-intrusion bar had snapped on its hinge, flew just under my armpit, pierced the seat, and locked me in even more. When the first passers-by arrived, I heard them shouting, asking if I was okay. I couldn't move or speak in any way. I was buried in the remains of my car. I heard the firefighters arrive, and I heard them start cutting through the other vehicle first. I heard a helicopter land, then later take off. Finally, more than an hour after the crash, they began cutting into my car. I remember hearing one of them say, "There's nothing we can do here." When they finally cut the roof open, I immediately raised my head and started breathing normally again. I said, I'm okay. They started working faster, thinking I was moments from dying. Once they freed my arms and legs, I stood up on my own. I was completely unharmed, not a scratch. They helped me out of the wreck, and I stood on my feet. I remember turning my head and seeing my car for the first time. It was the size of a smart Fortwo. All four wheels were scattered around the scene, and the engine, still attached to the transmission, was sitting 6 feet away from what used to be the hood. The rescuers kept checking me for more than half an hour at the scene. I asked several times to be let go, but they couldn't release me, so I was taken to the ER, where they checked me from head to toe and finally let me go. The truck driver had several broken ribs but seemed stable. The other driver, who had been wearing a seatbelt, was airlifted to the ER. I heard he survived but spent more than 2 months in the hospital. The rescuers later told me that when they saw the wreckage and called out to me a few times with no response, they assumed I hadn't made it and turned their attention to the other vehicles. Story 7. This one still keeps me up at night. I met a girl on Tinder and we had been on a few dates. On the third date, I invited her over for dinner. I made pasta by hand, we had some wine, and finished with a gooey chocolate brownie while watching a film and getting a little affectionate. Suddenly, my stomach dropped and gave me the dreaded, "You have 8 seconds" warning. Just as it hit, she stood up and said, "Just going to the bathroom real quick." I couldn't go before her. I could feel a storm building inside me. And if I went in first, I'd be in there a while, and it would not smell pleasant. So I opted to clench. She was just peeing, right? Wouldn't take long. 3 minutes later, I was sweating, pacing the house and starting to panic. Luckily, I had just bought toilet paper that day and left it in the laundry room. I grabbed a roll, ran outside into the rain, and just managed to pull my pants down before a catastrophic explosion happened. It was like tar. As I was finishing up, I heard her inside calling, "Where are you?" So I pretended I was looking for my dog in the dark, even though he was clearly standing next to her. I played it cool. We ended up hooking up. She left. Now it's 3 a.m. and I needed to hide the evidence. I opened the back door and my dog ran out into the darkness and started eating what I had just left there. I was horrified. I had to wrestle him away, bury the mess, and wash him thoroughly. For the next month, every time we snuggled and he came near my face, I couldn't help but feel weirded out. Story 8. I got a very personal piercing when I was 51. I had thought about it since my mid-20s. I'd never had anything pierced before. No ears, nose, nipples, nothing. I work in the legal field, and when I'm dressed, I look like your typical guy in khakis and a blue button-down shirt. My life with my wife had really slowed down. She would still be intimate with me, but she didn't seem all that interested. About 3 years before I went through with it, I texted her asking how she'd feel if I got a piercing down there. As usual, she responded neutrally. Pure Switzerland. I think she just said, I'm surprised you'd even think of doing that. Last year, I was talking to a tattoo artist who introduced me to his piercer girlfriend. I told her I had always been interested, but never followed through. She didn't do piercings below the waist, but gave me the name of someone who did. I met him, he was great, and finally just said, let's do it. So now the only people who know about it are me, my wife, my dermatologist, and a few surprise TSA agents. Story 9. In 2020, I was in my last semester of respiratory school. I lived about 45 minutes from campus, and our final exam was the next day. I was at my boyfriend's house and decided I had studied enough since I was confident I'd pass. He made us drinks, and after that, I don't remember much. I woke up the next morning and realized I was going to be late. The building was locked from the outside due to pandemic restrictions, but we were still allowed to take the exam there. I texted my professor to let her know, and she said it was fine. I drove there completely dazed and confused. The professors let me in and asked, did you have too much to drink last night? I just replied, no comment. I took the exam, said goodbye to my classmates, and went home. Later, my boyfriend told me I had gotten so drunk that I took off my shirt, dropped it on the floor, accidentally used it as a bathroom, and then tossed it into the clean laundry pile. Despite all that, I still got an 87 on the exam. Story 10. In junior high, the bus dropped me off about 2 hours before my parents got home. For weeks, I had been using our family's slow 56K dial-up connection to look at adult pictures that took forever to load. I remember one image in particular. Jenna Jameson in mechanic overalls, covered in engine oil, was a favorite. Each time I would stop just before things started to feel weird, unsure of what might happen if I kept going. One day I decided to push through. I kept going, and eventually I had what I now know was my first full release. I remember the overwhelming feeling, full body, mind-numbing, toe-curling intensity. I stared in disbelief at what had just happened. It wasn't urine. It was something different. I panicked and frantically cleaned the keyboard, the desk, the monitor, even the wall. And then a terrifying thought hit me. What if I had to do something to switch things back from that mode to normal? What if I wouldn't be able to use the bathroom like before? What if I needed help and had to go to my parents and explain everything? So I did what any panicked young teen would do. I ran to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of peach tea Snapple, and chugged it. Then I drank another and another. Before my parents got home, I forced myself to try and go to the bathroom, just to be sure I still could. After pacing the house and enduring a serious stomachache, I finally did. I was okay. Crisis averted. For weeks after that, the cycle repeated. Clean up, drink multiple peach teas, test bathroom functionality. My mom started doubling up on Snapple, thinking I loved it. But it wasn't the tea. It was my ridiculous secret security ritual. This was before I could just search online. What is this white stuff that came out of me? I'm sorry for all the Snapple you had to buy, Mom. I was just a confused teenager. To this day, whenever I drink peach tea, I still get a strange rush of memory from that galaxy-shaking moment and the sheer panic that followed. Story 11. I'm not sure my wife is a great mom. She loves our 3 young kids and takes care of them, but she can be extremely critical and impatient. I can't leave her alone with them for more than 15 minutes without someone ending up crying or yelling, whereas I can handle a whole day with all of them without major meltdowns and still maintain structure and discipline. To be clear, she's not physically abusive, but I worry she's approaching the edge of emotional harm. Our oldest is 4, and sometimes she yells at him like he's an adult over normal toddler stuff, like mispronouncing a word, standing on the couch, or repeating a song too many times. He's honestly incredibly sweet and probably the best behaved child I've ever seen, but she loses patience over the smallest things. She's hard on me too, but I can push back. The kids can't, so I spend a lot of time running interference. Sometimes our 4-year-old has a moment, sure, but most of the time she's the one who starts the tension. And she's not much better with our 2-year-old twins. Their daycare teachers always say our oldest is sweet and well-mannered. I just worry he'll grow up resenting her, like I did with my own emotionally reactive parent. She works full-time and always says she's exhausted or stressed, but she doesn't need to work. I earn about $150,000 a year, and we live in a low-cost area. I used to encourage her to be a stay-at-home parent, but I gave up on that idea. Our oldest will be in kindergarten soon, and honestly, I don't think her being home all day with them would help. I once considered homeschooling, but quickly dropped that idea too. She's never been very academic, and I don't think she should be the primary educator for our kids. We also live too far from relatives to have much help, and she treats my mother terribly. Yes, my mom has made mistakes and hasn't always respected our parenting choices, but the way my wife speaks to her can be cruel and unnecessary. I don't really know what to do anymore. I'm hoping some of this is still hormonal or stress-related and will improve over time. But the truth is, our kids clearly gravitate toward me. When I walk into a room, they light up. They cuddle me, laugh with me, follow me around. My wife, on the other hand, often barely gets acknowledged. And strangely enough, I'm the one who does most of the actual discipline. Timeouts, explanations, and rare but firm consequences. Even her own mother has shared concerns about how she behaves with the kids. I just hope things change, for all of our sakes. Story 12. It's been a rough year. My ex left and stuck me with a house we had just bought the year before. I couldn't afford it without working 2 jobs. Then spring came, and the basement flooded so badly the place became nearly unlivable. I did what I could to hold it together. My life was a mess. The house was going into foreclosure since insurance didn't cover the damage. And on top of everything, I had to attend a family Easter gathering. I woke up and did a quick cold rinse-off because the water heater had gone under, with the basement. Same with the furnace. It was hard to even get out of bed. I put on a smile and went to the family function, where I got the usual treatment from my self-important cousins and sharp-tongued aunt. I sipped some coffee after brunch and got out of there as fast as I could. On my way back to what was left of my home, I realized I hadn't used the bathroom before leaving. It was a half-hour drive, so I thought I could hold it. But as I turned onto my street, I knew I was wrong. I was driving an old 4-cylinder S10 pickup. It wasn't fast, but I pushed it to its limit, nearly 100 miles per hour down my country road. I got within a quarter mile of my house when disaster struck. It happened. Full-on accident at 100 miles per hour. I slowed down, trying to stay calm, hovering above the seat while working the manual transmission. Not easy. I got inside, walked straight to the bathroom and cried. Then I took an ice-cold shower and tried to pull myself together. That might have been one of the worst days of my life. Story 13. Once I was at a barbecue party by a river. My friends, among them my crush, were goofing around on the riverbank. I wanted to join them, so I changed into my swim shorts, slipped on my Crocs, and waded across the rocks while carrying a pair of underwear, not meant to rhyme, to the river. When I decided to get out, for reasons I still can't explain, I chose to change clothes right there at the shore. I don't know how my brain failed to register the very obvious risk, but I didn't have a towel. Halfway through changing, I realized what I was doing. And by then, it was too late. Everyone at the party, at least 5 strangers, my friends, and worst of all, my crush, saw either way too much or at least my backside. The wet fabric just made everything slower. 2 guys walking by even laughed and said, "Hurry up." I still vividly remember the moment, and it haunts me to this day. Story 14. Back in high school, my sister's friend used to trade favors for help with her homework. My older sister and 2 of her friends took turns driving to school, and I'd tag along. Occasionally, I'd help one of her friends with their math homework on the way home, since I was in an advanced class and understood the material. One time, my sister and one friend had to stay late, so it was just me and the girl I'd been helping. She asked if I could stop by her house to help her out a bit more. I said sure, figuring I'd just walk home afterward. We sat down and went over her math problems. Without realizing it, I ended up doing half the worksheet. When we finished, she thanked me and asked if I wanted to hang out in the backyard. She brought out something to smoke and we relaxed. She kept thanking me for the help, then gave me a mischievous look and asked if I'd ever had a girlfriend or, well, anything close. I laughed and admitted I hadn't. She smiled and said she wanted to really thank me. What followed was a moment I didn't expect, and to this day, I've never told anyone about it. But after that, she offered a deal. If I helped with homework regularly, she'd keep thanking me. As a 15-year-old, it was hard to say no. I'm pretty sure my sister suspected something, but she never brought it up. Story 15. My buddies and I used to go to our school teacher's house on weekends for extra lessons. Class started at 6 a.m., and he had a small study room with its own entrance. One morning, a friend hadn't shown up yet, so our teacher asked someone to grab his phone from the living room. Eager to be helpful, I volunteered. I had never been inside his house before. It was still dark, and I fumbled along the wall looking for a light switch. When I finally flipped one on, there it was. I had walked straight into his bedroom. His wife was fast asleep and not wearing anything. I froze in place. My whole body was trembling. I quickly grabbed the phone and ran back outside, completely forgetting to turn off the light. That was the first time I'd ever seen someone undressed in real life. I've never told this story to my friends. I was too afraid they'd laugh, or worse, tell the teacher. And I was pretty sure he wouldn't have reacted kindly. Story 16. In my early 20s, I worked at a small computer shop in a not-so-great part of town. Because of the area, we had several security cameras both inside and outside. In 2 years, I never needed them for the shop. But one time, the footage ended up working in my favor. Next door to us was a men's hair salon. It was run by a couple of guys and had a handful of very attractive stylists. We all had suspicions it wasn't a real salon. Fancy cars were always parked out front, but no one ever seemed to get a haircut. The guys were friendly though, and when things were slow, I'd chat with them outside. One day they mentioned a guy who had stolen a laptop from them, but they couldn't prove it. I told them I had security footage and offered to take a look. One of our cameras had a good view of the parking lot. Sure enough, a few days back, we found footage of the guy getting into a car with the laptop. The salon owner was thrilled. A week later, he walked into my shop and said they'd gotten the laptop back and the thief was in serious trouble. Then he asked if I could close up for an hour during lunch. I said sure, assuming we were grabbing lunch as thanks. It wasn't lunch. Let's just say I now know for certain it wasn't just a salon. And I also know that Cindy is very talented, extremely charming, and that if you lie down on a cheap leather couch for too long without clothes, it can be very hard to peel yourself off. Story 17. When I was 10, my parents and I went to St. Louis to shop for back-to-school clothes. Before we hit the stores, we stopped at a buffet, and I went all out. An hour or so into walking around the mall, I told my mom I needed to use the bathroom urgently. She said we needed to find my dad first so someone could wait outside and make sure I was safe. We searched for about 15 minutes, and I eventually told her that it was now or never. So she waited outside the restroom while I ran in. I spent the next 30 minutes in there, absolutely destroying their plumbing. It was like a scene straight out of a movie. When I finally came out, feeling 5 pounds lighter, both my parents were waiting. They were chuckling, and my dad looked at me and said, "I thought that was a grown man in there, not you." Story 18. As a teenager in the early days of the internet, think news groups, BBS forums, and Prodigy, I began exploring my interests online. By the time Yahoo chat rooms were popular, I was already a seasoned internet user. At 16, I started getting into BDSM and found myself drawn to the dom role. When I turned 18, I started attending local meetups known as munches and became a regular in a nearby BDSM group. I quickly discovered that I wasn't so interested in the bondage or physical aspects of BDSM, but deeply connected with the emotional dynamic of domination and submission, DS. By my late 20s, I had started stepping away from the scene, especially after certain mainstream portrayals shifted the community's tone. Still, I enjoyed being someone newcomers could talk to for safe and respectful guidance. To this day, I remain interested in what I call emotional intensity within a D/S relationship. I particularly valued helping partners explore identity, vulnerability, and power dynamics, often through themes of objectification and rebuilding. Oddly enough, I also strongly believe in equality and actively support women and non-binary people in my professional life. Many assume that the D/dynamic implies something unhealthy or demeaning, but that's not how it works in reality. That said, I tend to keep this side of myself private. Some close friends know I'm into alternative dynamics, but not to what extent. I once had a partner who really enjoyed the deeper end of the D/spectrum. One day, she kept messaging me while I was out with a close friend. So, I put her on speakerphone in the car and introduced her to him. Then I asked her to apologize to him for interrupting, and, as part of our dynamic, describe in detail how she would make it up to him if they ever met. By the end of the call, my friend was blushing, she was fully immersed in her mindset, and I was smiling. Everyone involved was comfortable, and it was one of those odd moments where different worlds meet in the most unexpected way. Story 19. I hate my sexuality. I mean my soul self, my thoughts, fantasies, and urges as a whole. I don't want to hate it, and I'm glad to say that over the past several years, I've taken real steps to get better through therapy and other efforts. But it's been this way for as long as I can remember. There was no childhood trauma, no abuse, no incident that caused it. My parents were always very open and healthy about these topics. I didn't grow up in a shame-filled or prudish environment. Still, I've always felt like my sexuality is this other thing, like a shadow version of myself that takes over my brain and body, only to leave me again afterward. I wish I could flip a switch and turn off that feeling. Like I said, I don't want to feel this way about myself. I've worked so hard on self-acceptance. I even have a lot of unusual fantasies and preferences that I've weirdly grown proud of owning. But there's always this deep, lingering sense that my sexuality is something uninvited, something separate from who I really am. Maybe this one's a bit of a downer, but honestly, it feels good just getting it off my chest. Story 20. In 1967, I was 16. Several of my older friends from high school were about to head into the military. It was the middle of the Vietnam War, and they wanted to take one last surf trip to California before they shipped out. I wanted to go badly, and eventually my parents gave me permission. We were surfers from the Gulf Coast, where the waves are usually pretty poor, so California was paradise. We traveled up and down the coast trying different beaches. While staying in San Clemente, we decided to surf a spot just north of Trestles on the Marine base, called Cotton's Point. It was a big day by our standards, and the beach had no amenities, no restrooms, no water, nothing. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom badly. I walked up the beach and found a stairway that led to houses on the bluff above. I pushed into some shrubs until I could see a manicured lawn and rose bushes, then backed off, handled my business, wiped with some leaves, and headed back. As I returned to my friends, one of them said, "You know, I think that's Richard Nixon's house up there. And ever since, I've believed I may have taken a dump in the former president's garden." Story 21. It was late at night, and I was walking home after a night out in a city I had just recently moved to. The full moon cast a soft glow over the bay in the distance. The air was still, with only a faint breeze rustling through the trees. The peace was shattered by a low rumble, a warning from my stomach. A wave of dread washed over me, so I clenched and walked faster, hoping I could make it home in time. A few minutes later, I realized it was no use. My body had other plans. I was seconds from disaster. Just then, as if by some divine intervention, a beam of moonlight shone down on a patch of shrubs next to a creek, tucked behind a low wall. I darted over, crouched down, and did what needed to be done. I found some big leaves nearby to clean up, then tossed them into the water. Relieved and recovering, I used my phone's flashlight to inspect the damage. That's when I noticed the leaves I'd used looked strangely familiar. Looking up, I realized I had just done the unthinkable. I had chosen the rhubarb patch behind a nearby convent. Apparently, I had just guaranteed the nuns a bountiful harvest that year. My skin smelled like rhubarb for days, and according to my girlfriend at the time, it stayed green for longer than it should have. Story 22. In 2017, I went to a college party here in Brazil. My friends convinced me to go, and I agreed. When I got there, I dove straight into the music and grabbed a cold beer. I kept drinking, about 12 beers in, and then started mixing it with rum and vodka. That's when things got wild. I turned into a peace-promoting hippie and, in my drunken logic, declared that the path to world peace was through affection. Specifically, I joked about needing to show love physically. Surprisingly, one Colombian girl agreed. People started calling me the Spanish guy because of my last name, even though I'm Brazilian with Spanish roots. So when I approached the Colombian girl, I politely asked her for a moment of fun. With her consent, I leaned in and then half-jokingly told her in Spanish, "Your debt to Spain is forgiven." The night spiraled from there. I kept drinking, smoked a little, and by 5 a.m. I was completely out of it, unable to stand up while others were still partying. A friend offered me something I'd never tried before. I didn't know better and took it, once by mouth and then again as intended. I was carried out of the party by friends. I lost my wallet, my phone, everything. When I finally made it home, I threw up everything but somehow avoided a horrible hangover. I was lucky. I've never done anything like that again. Looking back, it feels like a scene from American Pie, but much less funny in real life. Story 23. One time at a water park when I was 10, I was a chubby kid and didn't realize until it was almost too late that I had to use the bathroom urgently. So, I had an accident in the pool. I quickly got out when no one was watching, clutching my backside like my life depended on it, and rushed off in the direction I thought the bathroom was. But I got lost and ended up in the shower stalls instead. Just as I got in, I heard people coming in, about 5 or so I couldn't leave. In full panic mode, I scooped the mess from my underwear and placed it below the shower head, then used the water to clean the underwear. I did this about 3 times, moving quickly between stalls, turning on the shower in each one I used. Eventually, there was only a faint stain left on the fabric, and from the back it wasn't very noticeable. That's when I rejoined the pool, heading to a spot where water was pouring in from the jets. I stood there, letting the flow hit me, hoping it would rinse away the rest. When it was time to leave, I grabbed one of my mom's cover-ups, whatever those are officially called, and walked out like nothing ever happened. Story 24. There's this man I spend a lot of time with, more than some couples, honestly. We train together in martial arts, have long and deep conversations late into the night, cook and clean side by side, even do laundry together. When I'm unwell, he's there. He made soup from scratch the other day when nothing else would stay down. He cares for me in a way that feels both gentle and deeply present. But it's the physical closeness, the unspoken intimacy, that stays with me most. One night during a conversation about my mental health, he reached for my hand, not just to hold it, but to study it. He traced my scars in the shape of my fingers, commented on how, even though they're soft, they're clearly hands that have worked hard. It felt like he was memorizing them. Another night, I stood to say goodnight. He had just come from the shower. Without a word, he wrapped me in a long, slow hug, gently swaying side to side. It was the kind of hug that felt like home. The next night, we were talking again, and before I could stand, he came up behind me, wrapped his arms across my chest, his face beside mine. I froze. My heart skipped. I didn't want to move. He massages my shoulders when they lock up, teases me about my so-called harem of admirers, but always with a softness behind his smile. One time after I'd been struggling, I hesitated before accepting one of his hugs. Later, he told me, "You seem more like yourself again." When I admitted I liked his hugs, he just smiled and said, "Oh, thank you." We talk about relationships, emotional patterns, serious things. He knows I'm trans. He said he's mostly straight, but could maybe see himself with a very specific kind of guy. And sometimes I catch the way he looks at me and wonder, am I that guy? Or am I just seeing what I want to see? Here's the complicated part. I replay those moments when I'm alone. The feeling of his body behind mine, his hands tracing my fingers, the scent of his hair when I braided it. I wonder what it would feel like if that hug led to something more, if his lips met my neck, if he told me he sees me the way I see him. These thoughts have started to slip in even during moments of intimacy with others. And the hardest part? We live together. He's my landlord. It's messy. It's probably unrequited. But it's real. It lives in my chest like a quiet ache I can't quite shake. Feel free to ask me anything. Story 25. One time I was out running errands at Walmart. Pretty uneventful, you'd think. But earlier that morning, I had a big breakfast. Coffee, eggs, and a glass of milk. What I didn't know yet was that I'd developed a lactose sensitivity later in life. So there I was, mid-aisle, when the bubble guts hit. And I mean hit. I tried, truly tried, to make it to the restroom in time. By some miracle I did. But unfortunately, the stall didn't share in my good fortune. I pulled down my pants, clenching with every ounce of strength I had, but it was no use. As I bent my knees, I lost control, and let's just say the wall behind me got redecorated. It was a mess, a disaster, a crime scene. Canada would have applauded the coverage. I finished the best I could and ran out of there like my life depended on it. To the Walmart employee who had to deal with that, I'm sorry. To whoever discovered it, may peace be upon you, because it certainly wasn't in that stall. And to lactose, sincerely, thanks for nothing. Story 26. My family was going on a road trip, and I was around 8 or 9 years old at the time. Before we left, I was told to use the restroom. I didn't. Naturally, a little while into the drive, I needed to go. Badly. I held it as long as I could, but eventually my body gave out. I had an accident right there in the car. I begged my dad to pull over, and when we stopped, I sprinted to the restroom. It didn't take long to realize the underwear was unsalvageable. So I did what made perfect sense to my 8-year-old brain. I took them off and tossed them into the toilet. Then I flushed and flushed again. What I didn't know at that age was what clogging a toilet meant. I just assumed everything disappeared like magic, but it didn't. The water rose and I panicked. I slammed the lid down, skipped washing my hands entirely, and ran out, jumping back into the car. Minutes later, someone mentioned a terrible smell in the car. They figured it must have been a skunk or something we passed along the road. I kept silent. To this day, no one in my family knows the truth. Story 27. I was seeing an older woman. She was 34. I was 22. She was absolutely stunning. Beautiful face, kind heart, amazing body. We weren't looking for anything serious, just a meaningful connection and a bit of fun. Our first time together was incredible. The chemistry was amazing. Then we switched to doggy style, and of course, I wanted to watch. But that's when I saw it. Just the tiniest bit of something unexpected. A small speck, just barely visible, where it shouldn't have been. Even though we were mid-act, I couldn't unsee it. It was like my mind went into two modes at once. One enjoying the moment, the other slowly backing away in horror. I felt physically good and mentally unsettled. And even though it was only a little, I knew it had made contact. I didn't know what to do. I didn't say anything. We switched positions and I did my best to finish, but the image stuck. I didn't bring it up. I never wanted to embarrass her or make her feel bad. From that point on, I always found a reason to avoid that position. Blaming old knee injuries or saying it just wasn't comfortable. We eventually stopped seeing each other, but the truth is that one image stuck with me more than the rest of her. Story 28. When I was 17, my friends and I took a road trip to one of their lake houses. On the way home, 2 guys and 2 girls in the car, we decided to play a game called Padiddles. If you're not familiar with it, Padiddles is a game where, whenever someone says Padiddles, everyone has to slap the roof of the car. The last person to do it has to remove an article of clothing. Let's just say, by the time we were a couple of streets away from my parents' house, we were all completely undressed. As we approached, I figured we'd pull behind the church up the hill from my house so everyone could get dressed before we arrived. But no sooner did I put the car in park than I looked up and saw a police officer walking toward the vehicle. Apparently, he had followed us back there, probably suspicious about 4 teens pulling into an empty lot behind a church. He approached and said, "Well, this is something we've got here, isn't it?" He let us get dressed, then had all of us step out and show our IDs. 3 more officers showed up, thinking it might be something far more inappropriate. We explained the game, awkward as that was, and luckily they believed us. They gave us a long lecture about how someone could have taken pictures, put them online, and how dangerous that situation could have become. But in the end, they let us go. We never talked about it again. It's been 18 years, and I still think about it from time to time. Story 29. Before COVID, I started dating this woman and things moved fast. It was one of those whirlwind situations. I was attending her work events before I even knew her favorite color. After a few months, we realized it wasn't working and parted as friends, slowly falling out of contact. During the pandemic, I started working at a small neighborhood market. Every day, the same man would come in, usually tipsy, and buy a single pack of cigarettes. He'd always complain about the price and demand a discount. But my boss, a former smoker, had a hard rule. No discounts on cigarettes, not even for bulk buyers. It got annoying at first, but eventually became part of the routine. Then one evening, I went to the restaurant next door to have a beer and bumped into the woman I used to date. We caught up, and I casually asked what brought her to this side of town, since it was mostly locals who came by. She said she was cat-sitting for her brother and showed me a picture. Yup, It was him, the same guy who came in every day complaining about cigarettes. The next day, he came in again with the usual attitude. I lost my patience, leaned in, and quietly said, "Hey, I used to date your sister." It was a petty move, but I knew he'd react. And wow, did he? He shouted, stomped his feet, and stormed out, saying he'd never shop with us again because of how rude we were. Later that night, I got a text from her asking what happened. I kept it vague, told her I mentioned we used to date and that her brother comes in drunk every day. She was surprised and thanked me for letting her know. Apparently, his family staged an intervention and sent him to rehab. I never sold him another pack of smokes, and his family never believed that I said anything other than a polite hello. Moral of the story? Be kind to your cashiers. You never know who they've dated. Story 30. I was visiting family out of town once, and my aunt's sister, my aunt by marriage, made some homemade edibles, cookies to be specific. They were delicious, and I have a high tolerance, so I had a few. Later, my sister and I went out for a quick drive so I could smoke a cigarette. While we were riding around this small town we weren't from, the edibles kicked in, and so did an emergency. I needed a restroom immediately. We finally made it to a gas station, and I rushed inside. It was a tiny place with one single bathroom. I didn't care, I just needed it. I barely made it in time, and then came sweet relief. But something was off. It didn't smell like, well, what you'd expect. It smelled like extremely potent cannabis, the kind of smell that makes your eyes water. The bathroom was filled with the strongest aroma of weed I've ever experienced. Just as I was finishing up, someone knocked. I hurried, cleaned up, and opened the door, only to find one of the most attractive men I'd ever seen standing right there. I didn't say a word. I just speed walked around him, left the store, and jumped into the car. I still wonder what went through his head when he walked into that cloud of herbal chaos. Story 31. Once, my best friend clogged her bathtub at her old high-rise apartment. We lived on the 10th floor, by using a sock instead of a proper stopper to fill the tub for a bath. As you can probably guess, the sock got stuck. We tried to get it out, but just pushed it farther in. Being young and not so wise adults, we didn't think to ask for help or hire someone. Instead, we just left it. Fast forward 2 months. The tub was still full of murky water, and we were sick of it. So we had the brilliant idea to use a bottle of sulfuric acid that the previous tenants had left under the bathroom sink. There were 2 big bottles, and we used a full one. To be fair, it worked. The sock was completely dissolved. However, the acid didn't just stop at the sock, it also corroded the plumbing underneath. So badly, in fact, that it caused flooding on 2 floors below us. The damage was massive. Pipes had to be replaced on our floor and the ones beneath it. Did anyone find out it was us? Somehow, no. No one traced it back. A few months later, we moved out. But the damage? Yeah, it was pretty bad. Story 32. I served in the Army for over a decade, and believe it or not, I was under the influence of cannabis for much of that time. My job often involved driving large military trucks, including on long-distance routes. And yes, I'll admit it, there were times I drove with a joint in my hand. I never had an accident, and I was never caught because I was never tested. Random drug testing was conducted on base, but since those tests required transport to be pre-booked, in case of positive results needing follow-up at pathology, I always knew when they were coming because I worked in transport. I'd conveniently be off base during testing windows. And it wasn't just me. At least half the people in my unit did the same. At one point, I was even buying from my own sergeant, who in turn was buying from a military police sergeant. When that MP sergeant eventually got caught, I introduced my sergeant to someone new. This was over 20 years ago and well past any statute of limitations. I've since grown up, changed my habits, and made far better life choices. But yeah, that was my reality for a while. Story 33. Let me start by saying I'm not blood-related or legally connected to this family. My mom grew up in a group home and became friends with the family I'm now part of. She was never adopted by them, although it was discussed for years. The courts made it difficult because she was close to 18, and the paperwork never happened. I grew up with her brother's 2 sons and had my first kiss with the oldest. Years later, I found out he had another son with someone else. That fact was kept under wraps until a family reunion, where I met him for the first time. He was 17 and I was around 13. We got along due to shared interests, and over time, he even talked me out of a few really dark moments. When I was 18, I visited again and realized I had developed a serious crush on him. I let it slip accidentally before I left, and he was hesitant because I had just turned 18. But I convinced him to give us a chance. 3 years of dating later, we're now married and expecting a baby. His mother is the best mother-in-law I could ask for. Everyone is thrilled that I became the connection that finally made the families legally related, since my mom never got to be adopted. However, things got a little weird at the wedding when they started saying they still wanted to adopt my mom, even though she's in her 40s now. They insisted it wouldn't be strange, but my husband and I were seriously uncomfortable because it would make us legally cousins. We tried to explain that it didn't feel right. I hope they eventually drop the idea and just appreciate the fact that, through us, the families finally became one. Story 34. I once took acid at a bonfire in Eugene, Oregon. It was in a Visine bottle, back when they had removable tops. I told my buddy I had to work the next day, so just give me one hit. He tilted the bottle, and I tilted my head back with my tongue out. Then I felt something in my mouth and saw his wide-eyed face. The cap had come off, and I had just taken 20+ hits. I tripped hard for the next 12 hours, and then I had to go to work at Sunglass Hut in the mall. My first customers, two very energetic, fashionable men. Even on a normal day, I might have had trouble keeping up, but in my state, I was barely functioning. They ended up choosing two of the most expensive pairs we sold, and I had to ring them up. But I couldn't see the numbers on the old green LCD register. Shapes and words were jumping at me, and nothing made sense. After 20 minutes of struggling while they complained, I gave up. I went to the back room and peeked through the slats until they left. Once they were gone, I closed the store gate, called my boss, and said I had to leave. I never went back after that. Story 35. Back in 9th grade, our school took a sailing trip to the West Coast. About 20 of us lived on a real ship for a few days. It was an amazing experience. On one of the last nights, we were playing around, and I got all wound up and jumped onto what I thought was a railing. It turned out to be this massive wooden oar or beam, probably 15 feet long and a few inches thick. Solid wood. I jumped with both feet, launching one end into the air. It ricocheted off the side of the boat and smacked one of the teachers square in the face. She was my homeroom and science teacher, and we never really got along, to be honest. It hit her nose directly. There was blood swelling, maybe even broken bones. It was bad. Only one other girl saw what happened. We weren't even close, but we locked eyes and never spoke of it again. I thought for sure she'd tell someone, but she didn't. Maybe it was because the teacher wasn't exactly popular. No one asked questions, no one investigated. I avoided her wing of the school for a while. I've never told anyone until now. I almost forgot about it until this very moment. Story 36. Back in middle school, I had a close female friend. We used to mess around, playful wrestling and joking like kids do. One day things escalated unexpectedly. We kissed without thinking, and then, in a blur, it went too far, way too fast. I swear the entire moment lasted 3 minutes. We weren't even that close of friends, but something about that experience bonded us deeply. Thankfully, nothing serious came from it. She didn't get pregnant, and we both went on to live relatively normal lives. She eventually married, had 4 kids, and still lives in her childhood home. I have 2 kids now, and every year when I visit my parents, we exchange a friendly, hello. That's it. Still, I think about that connection. It was raw, emotional, something I've been subconsciously chasing ever since. I often daydream. What if both our partners passed away and we reunited later in life? Not that I want that, but the thought crosses my mind. It's probably just fantasy, a way to amuse myself as I deal with daily life. But when we talk, there's something primal between us, something neither of us mentions. We avoid doing something as simple as grabbing coffee because we both know where that road could lead, and it would betray the lives we've built. So I live this quiet, measured life here across the pond. A very British sort of existence, really. Story 37. It feels like nothing really matters anymore. The government is corrupt and ineffective. People only act when it's about optics or money. Everyone seems to be phoning it in at work. It's rare to interact with someone professionally who actually cares about what they're doing. Money barely feels real now, and unless you're part of the have class, you probably won't ever be valued enough as a human to receive the numbers on a server that lets you afford even a basic existence, since even the cost of living is made up. The planet is unraveling around us. Whether or not you believe in global warming, it's hard to deny that every year the fires, hurricanes, and weather patterns worsen. Water is becoming scarce. Our obsession with having shiny new things, combined with built-in product obsolescence, means we're draining the planet's resources at an unsustainable rate. School shootings barely shock us anymore. Our current president, who's a convicted felon, survived an assassination attempt, and just days later the country had already moved on to the next headline. Regardless of how you feel about him, it's undeniable that his rise has shown the world that the law isn't always law and truth isn't always truth. At this point, it doesn't matter which side you're on. This truly feels like the darkest timeline. Someone could commit violence in broad daylight, and if the victim was unpopular enough, half the country would praise it and buy the same backpack or jacket worn by the perpetrator. Commit violence at a protest you arguably shouldn't even be at, and you might become a hero to millions, even land a spot on TV. We're heading toward our own destruction. Maybe we deserve it. Sometimes it just feels like nothing matters anymore. Story 38. In college, I started seeing this girl. I really liked her, but her behavior didn't match her words. I often felt anxious and uncomfortable around her, but for some reason, I kept trying, probably because I didn't have much self-respect at the time. She gave me the code to her apartment, and one day I got there about an hour and a half before she was due to arrive. Her roommate was home. She came out of her room with a towel wrapped around her hair and wearing pink shorts and a tight shirt that highlighted her figure. I made a casual comment about the gym, and that opened the door for us to start talking. One thing led to another, and we hooked up before the girl I was seeing got home. When she arrived, she could tell something was off. I couldn't act the same as usual. I'm not good at pretending. I left shortly after and never went back to her apartment again. We weren't really vibing, and the chemistry wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel bad because over time I realized she hadn't treated me very well. Looking back, I know her roommate was likely seeing someone too, but it didn't seem very serious, just like my situation. It was messy, but in that moment, it felt worth it. Story 39. I'm afraid of getting older and being alone. I'm 21, and I haven't had any close mutual friendships since middle school. That friend group ended in a traumatic way. Every friendship I've had since then happened by proximity. Right now, I have one solid friend in college and a few others through him. We hang out and talk, but I know I matter more to them than they do to me. I fear that once college ends, those relationships will drift into the occasional check-in or annual lunch, just like my one friend from high school. We meet once a year, talk for hours, and then don't really interact until the next lunch. It's not for lack of interest, I just feel like a burden. I'm deeply insecure and it makes me hesitate. I don't feel normal. My social energy is always low, and the lack of consistent friendships has made me extremely comfortable being alone. If it weren't for my family, who I'm lucky to be close with, I might have fallen into a darker place. I spend a lot of time online and have many internet friends. I feel wanted there, maybe because they don't know what I look like, or because we met through shared interests. Sometimes I wonder if I'm on the spectrum or dealing with some undiagnosed issue that's made socializing so hard. I know my weight plays a part. I'm working on myself, but when you're already overwhelmed with responsibilities, it's hard to find the motivation to change more. The thing is, I'm not depressed. I've been there before, especially during the pandemic, but I've made real improvements since. I'm doing well in school, about to graduate and start grad school, and I have an internship where I'm valued. I'm just accepting that I'm not normal, and maybe I won't get to experience things like romantic relationships. Unless I get incredibly lucky, I feel like I'll grow old doing my own thing, alone. And honestly, I think I'll be okay. But sometimes I crave connection so badly it hurts. I want love, intimacy, friendship, but it feels out of reach. I'll be fine. I just get scared sometimes. Story 40. I started making up a story when I was around 11 or 12 years old that, looking back, leans quite a bit into something resembling a power dynamic fantasy. I'm not the best with dates, but I clearly remember coming up with this story during a long walk at a house I only lived in during 6th and 7th grade. The basic idea was this. A prince is kidnapped, wearing only his undergarments, by a pirate who wore a leather vest instead of a shirt. The pirates didn't realize who he was and planned to sell him into slavery. But once they noticed the reaction of the other captives, they brought him to the captain. The captain decided the prince was worth more as a ransom. Still, since they had already left the kingdom, he thought it would be amusing to keep the royal as a personal servant for the time being. So he put the prince on a leash, never giving him any additional clothing. That's apparently where I lost interest in the story. But looking back, wow. I don't know what age is considered typical to start discovering what you're into, but that might have been a little early for something that specific. Story 41. This happened to my friend's older brother and his brother's girlfriend. They've both done a lot of questionable things over the years, but this one takes the cake. A few years back, when they were about 21, they went on a walk together. The nature trail they were on led to a road next to some cornfields. We live in a very rural, agricultural area. Anyway, the girlfriend suddenly had to use the bathroom, badly. She didn't want to use the porta potties in the parking lot of the trail because, fair enough, they were pretty gross. So instead, she decided to sneak into the crops and relieve herself there. Her boyfriend even acted as a lookout. While she was doing her business, by some wild coincidence, a police car happened to be driving down the road. The officer saw the boyfriend making subtle motions for her to crouch lower so she wouldn't be seen. Naturally, the cop got suspicious, pulled over, and asked him what he was doing. He said he was just out for a walk. Then the cop asked, "Who were you signaling to in the field?" My friend's brother denied everything. Unfortunately, at that moment, his girlfriend stood up to see what was happening. The cop went into the cornfield to investigate and saw the mess she had made. She tried to deny it, but it was pretty obvious. The officer ended up arresting both of them. And to make things worse, since this wasn't exactly a planned stop, she hadn't brought anything to clean up with. She pulled her pants up without wiping, and I heard the ride to the station was miserable for everyone involved. The smell alone was apparently awful, and some of it ended up on her clothes and even on the seat. Story 42. In September 2024, I noticed some pain in my ribs and developed a nasty chest infection. I went to a walk-in clinic and got an x-ray. No broken ribs, or so they thought. I was told I had asthma and was sent home with antibiotics and an inhaler. A month or so later, I got into a relationship, which is amazing, he's now my fiancé, and I started exploring more aspects of myself, including using more personal toys. This becomes relevant later. At the same time, my ribs weren't getting better. Walking was difficult, and I couldn't cough without pain. I have autism and ADHD, so my pain tolerance is pretty high. That, combined with a history of self-harm, made it hard to pinpoint exactly where the pain was coming from. Since the doctor said nothing was broken, I assumed I was fine. On October 25th, 2024, I met my partner in person for the first time in York. I felt breathless the entire time, not in the romantic way I hoped, and generally unwell, but I pushed through. The next day, my partner and I were sting a lot, and I sent a video from bed using my 10-inch toy. After that, I fell asleep. On October 27th, 2024, I woke up to the worst pain and an overwhelming feeling of suffocation. I ran to the bathroom and threw up blood, which terrified me. I called for help. Since I live in supported housing, I contacted my carers. I managed to sit on the sofa while waiting, but my symptoms worsened. I started feeling extremely warm and lay on the floor to cool down. My heart was racing, and then I blacked out. I woke up in an ambulance hearing frantic voices and realizing things were serious. I was rushed to the ER and had a CT scan almost immediately. It turned out I had 2 broken ribs since September, which the walk-in clinic failed to detect due to unclear imaging. But that was just the beginning. The pressure from using the aforementioned toy had pushed the broken ribs into my lung. This caused 2 liters of blood to pool in my chest wall. I had to have 2 chest tubes inserted, a terrifying and painful process to go through alone. Because of the blood loss, I needed a transfusion. I stayed in the ER until October 30th, when I was transferred to another hospital for surgery. The operation took place on Halloween. They needed to wash out my lungs and chest wall, remove clots, and clear a lot of fluid buildup. Unfortunately, my lung had collapsed before the surgery, and I stopped breathing during the procedure. Thankfully, they managed it in time. The recovery process was intense. My fiancé visited me in the hospital, which helped a lot as I went through physiotherapy and worked to reinflate my lung and breathe properly again. I ended up staying on the surgical ward for 10 days,